Welcome to the 2020 Assembly. My name is Errol Davis. I am privileged and honored to serve this year as chairman of the board and president of the African American Heritage House at Chautauqua, or AAHH, as we fondly refer to it. The AAHH is a diverse organization informed by the African American experience, committed to strengthening Chautauqua by encouraging and welcoming diversity, fostering honest conversations, and adding new voices to the programmatic mix, something I think that we did with great gusto in 2019. Today, more than ever, it is important that we all understand and own both our past and our present. The AAHH is committed to telling the stories that need to be told, primarily from an African American perspective. I encourage all of our viewers to visit our website, aaheritagehouse.org, to learn how you can become involved in our activities. As we are totally supported by contributions, I want to thank our many friends and supporters for making both last season and this season possible. In particular, I want to thank the Union Pacific Corporation for underwriting this entire season and assuring that the voices of the marginalized and the underserved will be heard both clearly and loudly this season. Without all of your critical support, we would be unable to bring the quality speakers to Chautauqua that we have over the years and will continue to do so this season. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your continuing support. And now, into our program. You know, when they write the history of civilizations, they write about a lot of different things. Sometimes they write about a nation's capability to make wars. Sometimes they write about its commerce. But they always write about the arts. The arts define us as a people and a culture. Whether it is a spoken word, the written word, or visual depictions, the arts define us by expressing our values and our culture. Today's speaker is a brilliant young artist whose works truly reflect the challenges of our difficult times. Dr. Fahamu Pecou is an interdisciplinary artist and scholar whose works combine observations on hip-hop, fine art, and popular culture. Dr. Pecou's paintings, performance art, and academic work address concerns around contemporary representations of Black masculinity and how these images impact both the reading and performance of Black masculinity. Dr. Pecou received his BFA at the Atlanta College of Art in 1997 and a PhD from Emory University in 2018. He exhibits his art worldwide in addition to lectures and speaking engagements at colleges and universities around the world. As an educator, he has developed Advantage Point, a narrative-based arts curriculum based on Black male youth. Dr. Pecou's work is featured in noted private and public national and international collections, including the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Société Générale Collection in Paris, and the Museum of Contemporary Art, Georgia, among many others. He was recently named the inaugural Artist in Residence for the Atlanta Beltline Project. His works are currently displayed in the current issue of the magazine Creative Loafing, and a commissioned work of his will appear this week on the cover of Atlanta magazine. In 2017, Dr. Pecou was the subject of a retrospective exhibition, Mirrors of Man, in Paris. His work also appears in several films and television shows, including Blackish, The Chai, and Lifetime's The 10th Date. A recipient of the 2016 Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptures Award, he is the founder and executive director of Adamatl, the virtual home for 21st century African diaspora art and culture in Atlanta. He was a selected artist for the 2020 Google Doodle for this year's Martin Luther King Day celebration. We are truly honored by his willingness to share his thoughts with us today, and I know that you're going to find his remarks both stimulating and enjoyable. Before we begin today's lecture, however, our live audience should know that you may submit questions for our live Q&A with Dr. Pecou through the submission portal at questions.chq.org from any mobile or desktop browser, or on Twitter using the hashtag #CHQ2020. His remarks today were pre-recorded the week of July 5th in Atlanta, but they will be followed, however, by a live Q&A with Dr. Pecou with questions submitted by our live audience tuning in around the world. My fellow Chautauquans, the AAHH is pleased to present to you Dr. Fahamu Pecou.
There's a story in Egyptian folklore about Osiris and his murder. And in this story, Osiris is murdered by his brother Set, who's envious of him. And if you know anything about Egyptian funerary rites, you know that when a person dies in Egyptian culture, they are buried with all of their organs, their personal items, things that will help them transition into the afterlife in a smooth and whole fashion. Well, to further humiliate Osiris, Set cuts his body up into all of these different pieces and hides the pieces in different places along the Nile Valley. He dismembers Osiris's body, scatters his pieces to the wind, essentially, so that Osiris is unable to make his transition into the afterlife. Osiris's wife, Isis, in an act of dedication and love, she spends the rest of her days seeking out these parts of Osiris's body, and wherever she finds one, she erects an obelisk as a marker of where she found this particular part. But ultimately, through this dedication, through this love, she collects all of Osiris's pieces and remembers him. So remember, he's dismembered by his brother Set, but she remembers him. She puts him back together. And she's able to actually impregnate herself, and she gives birth to the god king Horus. So I tell this story because it's kind of crucial in understanding the position of Black people in the African diaspora. Similar to Osiris, Black people, descendants of African slaves, have been dismembered from who we are, cut up into many, many pieces, whether it's the loss of our language, the loss of religion, the loss of culture, all the kinds of things that help us establish who we are. These pieces are fragmented, and it is incumbent upon us to remember who we are through the practices that we employ. And so there's a Kenyan scholar by the name of Ngugi wa Thiong'o who describes the experience of the Western imposition on Black subjectivity as a violent and multi-layered dismembering. And the violent contact between Africa and the Western world via slavery, colonialism, and subsequently globalism has resulted in and continues to inform the loss of memory, language, history, culture, religion, effectively all manner of identity politics for people of African descent. And the effects of the campaign of anti-Blackness has been sustained across centuries as well as continents. But how we resist these specters of anti-Blackness must forever be troubled and challenged. And it becomes increasingly irresponsible to label practices as resistance when those practices are rooted in the logic of the very system that oppresses us. So I ask the following questions. How might we express and perform our identity in a language or languages that sustain us? And how do we do the necessary work of detangling and detaching from the structures that have bound us to notions of anti-Blackness? These are questions that I explore in my practice, and I will speak to a couple of examples from my body of work. But first, I feel I should explain further the challenge of the language of Black expression. So when one mentions resistance, some very specific ideas come to mind. In particular, we think of movements like the Civil Rights Movement or the modern Black Lives Matter movement. But notions of suffering, trauma, lack, death are all embedded in these resistance narratives around Black bodies. And I believe this type of language is problematic because rather than being resistant to, the language of resistance as we currently understand it actually reifies much of the harm caused by white supremacy and anti-Blackness. I believe that in re-examining Black art and ultimately re-engaging African spiritual and cultural practices through the lens of critical art theory, we might discover a language of resistance that heals rather than harms. And in remembering our subjecthood, we can transcend the violence and impositions of Western ideologies on Black subjectivity. And we do this through art that performs resistance much more than it is a practice of rhetoric, of propaganda or politics. So I'm going to make a couple of distinctions. Language as in what we speak versus language as in what we mean. So language as in what we speak is one of the many organizing systems that attempts to make order of the world that we live in. As African descendant people, however, our traditional languages have also been a victim to the violence of anti-Blackness and Western domination. According to Wationgo, people of African descent throughout the diaspora suffer from linguicide or lingua fam. Linguicide is the linguistic equivalent of genocide, effectively having one's language eradicated. And lingua fam, on the other hand, is linguistic famine. And this is the result of linguistic deprivation, largely experienced on the African continent as a result of colonialism. I argue that the creative expression within the African diaspora resists much of the effects of the violence against traditional African language. And through our art, we have been able to build bridges that also communicate through and overcome many of the attempts to deny or silence our existence and experience. So much of my work as both an artist and scholar centers on the spiritual cosmology of the Yoruba of Nigeria. Yoruba spiritual cosmology, also known as Ifa, is an ancient system that predates Abrahamic religions. This spiritual practice traveled to the Americas as a part of the transatlantic slave trade and survived for centuries, hidden in plain sight, oftentimes conflating Yoruba deities or orishas with Catholic saints and figures. But this system is highly potent in the context of the Black diaspora because it has evolved and bent to meet the needs of the descendants of enslaved Africans forcibly brought to the West. Ifa provides a spiritual as well as cultural and social context that centers Black bodies and ideals, and it stands in stark contrast to the anti-Black sentiments embedded in Western language, religion, and cultural practices. Within Yoruba culture, the idea of balance is a central tenet, or rather, especially with respect to aesthetic value. Every person, object, action is weighed against its expression of outer or worldly beauty versus inner or spiritual beauty. In balancing inner and external beauty, one achieves wholeness, which is the aim, to mirror the balance or wholeness of the supreme being, Olodumare. Humanity must balance between the worldly and the sacred, form and function as essential expressions of the divine. Art is not for art's sake. It must also perform. It can not only look appealing, it must also serve a purpose or a function. And we see elements of this balance between form and function in artistic practices throughout the diaspora, but especially in the US. Since the time of Du Bois, Black American art and artists have straddled the line between Western concepts of art and art as a function of resistance. Black art has been used to confront the dehumanizing gaze of anti-Blackness. And Black artists working across disciplines have used their work to confront dominant images of Black people as savages. Black writers and musicians have engaged Black subjectivity, exploring the myriad articulations of Blackness through sound, poetry, and prose. Black art has aesthetic value, to be sure, but its function is always highly political and transgressive, especially in a society and culture that attempts to erase or devalue Black life. It is here that the idea of balance is most salient, because the function of Black art is not just to be aesthetically pleasing, nor are the implications of Black art merely political. The form and function combine, the worldly and the sublime coalesce to create levels of engagement interrogation, and ultimately communication. In his book, In Search of the Black Fantastic, Richard Eisen writes, "The applicability of the concept of resistance to contemporary black popular culture forces us to be careful in our deployment of the term and to consider the ways mere resistance does not always engender transformations, as well as the potential limits and inherent possibilities of resistance. Moreover, practices of resistance can assist in the legitimation of the status quo and strengthen in some ways the hold of hegemonic formations over the marginalized." In other words, what Aiton is saying is that sometimes the very language that we use to talk about resistance actually reifies the same things that we're attempting to resist. That rather than create separation, we're actually strengthening the hold that the oppression has on us. So how does one resist oppression using the language, tactics, or logic of their oppressor? As Audre Lorde says, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. We can train ourselves to respect our feelings and transpose them into a language so they can be shared. That language is art. It transcends words. It subverts the slipperiness of meaning and intent. And it does this by communicating directly to our spirit. Art is, in fact, a spiritual language. And amongst people of African descent, art and creative expression have always been at the center of how we socialize as human beings, but also how we commune with the divine. But as I said earlier, I wanted to make a distinction between language as in what we say and language as in what we mean. And language as in what we mean can be very different. This form of language requires nuance and is dependent on not just the words we use, but also other nonverbal cues. It's a liminal space rooted in understanding more so than in translation. So equally significant to this conversation about art's communicative merit is also its communicative power. It's arguably the unspoken elements of art that make it the most potent, the space between words. Liminality represents a crucial element in both Yoruba cosmology as well as African diasporic creative expression. Babatunde Lawal asserts that, given the association of creativity with the sublime, art making in Africa often involves much more than manipulating tools to give form to an idea. It is also a ritual process, reenacting the archetypal act of divine creation, linking the physical to the metaphysical and the human to the divine. This is why I believe our art, especially read through the lens of indigenous African philosophical and spiritual logic, transforms the role of our art and creates a means of engagement that supersedes spoken language. What we interpret, how we interpret, and what we do with that meaning ultimately are all critical to the context of the language we speak. And when that language is rooted in your destruction and erasure, there's only so far that form of language can sustain you or allow you to overcome your destruction. So to that point, I wanted to address work in a couple of different series that I have. The first is a series called Do or Die. And Do or Die is a body of work that was created between 2015 and 2016 and was a direct reaction to the spate of killings of unarmed black men by police officers during the time period between about 2012 and 2016. And this body of work emerged as a way of resisting the images and the spectacle of black violence that was dominating our media and continues to dominate our media by reorienting our experience around notions of death through the language of Ifa cosmology. So rather than continuing to compel black people to see death as something that is destructive and finite, through the language and through the lens of Ifa cosmology, I was able to reorient the experience around death and to elevate the victims of that violence from the space of victims to celebrated ancestors. And this is crucial, I think, as we, again, talk about the use of language and the practice of language in Black creative expression, particularly because the disconnect that we have with our cultural understanding and cultural meaning has created a space where death is almost unnatural. The way we experience death is unnatural. It's often violent. It's often sudden. The life expectancy of Black people in this country is greatly shortened. And when we compound that with the other forms of trauma of Black representation in media, it becomes crucial that we have a different relationship to notions of death and to death-bound subjectivity. And so through this body of work, through Do or Die, the paintings, photography, the performance art, the drawings, they all speak to the celebration of ancestor veneration within Ifa cosmology and the importance of that relationship, the importance of having that dialogue between life and death, the dialogue between the physical and the spiritual, and to not just see death as this hard stop, but to understand that death is just another state of being, and that our connection to our ancestors perpetually tethers us to the living world. And I think that there's power in this. There's power in understanding that death does not end you and death does not destroy you, but it actually becomes a stepping off point into something even greater than what the physical can allow or afford you to be. And so throughout this body of work, you see an interaction with a male spirit who represents the spirits of Black men who've been killed by various forms of anti-Black violence, who is petitioning with the divine feminine or Ajay to be able to return to his physical form and be a warrior, to be a soldier for Black life. You see this figure in the paintings. His covering, he has a head covering of cowrie shells, which is indicative of the fact that this spirit does not yet take physical form or does not yet have his head or ori in Ifa cosmology. But as he goes through the process of engaging with the divine feminine energy, he begins to take shape and takes form and understands his purpose and role. Again, I think, transposing the logic of Black death and Black death-bound subjectivity into the language of Ifa cosmology and Ifa philosophy, we begin to transform our relationship to death, and we begin to usher in a different type of resistance, a resistance that is rooted in affirmation of life as opposed to simply responding to the threat of death. Following that series, I did another body of work called Black Matter Lives, which was directly conversant with the Black Lives Matter mantra, which I actually find to be somewhat problematic, the language of that to be problematic. Black Lives Matter comes across as a plea. It is a request to be acknowledged. It is a request or seeking of permission to be able to exist and to be able to live. Whereas Black Matter Lives, the simple transposing of words within that statement, changes it from a request to a declaration. Black Matter Lives is an affirmation that we are here, that our lives matter, that our lives have meaning, that our presence has meaning in this world, and it does not require your permission to do so. And so within this body of work, it is an engagement with this idea that despite the traumas that have been imposed on Black bodies, we continue to thrive, we continue to excel, and we continue to evolve, past the violence, past the trauma, into spaces and into being that goes beyond even our own understanding of who we are. Again, rooted in the language of anti-Blackness and white supremacy. And so within Black Matter Lives, you see this juxtaposition between the black skin of the body and this gold material. And you don't know if the figure is actually gold underneath or if the gold is on top of the blackness. But there's in that this sort of symbiotic relationship between these notions of value, the value of black skin versus the value of external things like gold that we place so much value into. And so when we see our bodies as having value, when we see our bodies as being something worthy of being treated with respect and honor, it transforms the way we think about ourselves and transforms the way we expect others to also see and treat us. I understand that as a Black artist, similar to a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois, that all art is propaganda and ever must be. I see myself as a contributor to this legacy of Black artists who use their work as a form of resistance. That the function of the work is not just to be a pretty picture on the wall, but that it does something, that it elevates us, that it transforms us, that it moves us, even if it simply moves us to think or ask questions. That subtle movement can be monumental, ultimately. And so I make art as a form of protest, but more so as a form of love. Art has always been transformative, and it is not merely a reflection of our times and experiences. It also has the capacity to redirect us. As artists, it is imperative that we use our creativity to say the things that words do not easily convey. And I think it is equally imperative that as we teach ourselves and train ourselves to speak the language of who we are, to speak affirmations of who we are, that we take into account where the words that we choose come from and where those words derive their meaning, so that when we speak about ourselves, when we speak about our value, when we speak about resistance, that we're not reifying the trauma and harm that has been imposed upon us, but that we're actually affirming our humanity and affirming our being in ways that transform the world as we know it. So, in conclusion, I make art as a form of protest, but more so as a form of love. Art has always been transformative because it is not only merely a reflection of our times and experiences, it also has the capacity to redirect us. As artists, it is imperative that we use our creativity to say the things that words do not easily convey. And this is extremely imperative, again, as we examine the role of language and the language of resistance as it relates to the Black experience. It is imperative that we understand the root of the words that we're using and that we choose, that we select, that we are deliberate about using a type of language, using a type of communication that affirms our existence, that it affirms our livelihood, and that is not inherently rooted in our destruction. So it is imperative that as artists we use our brushes, our cameras, our hands, voices, our instruments, and our very bodies to show the world what our eyes sometimes fail to see. Finally, in closing, I'd like to present this short film that I created along with the Do or Die series called Emmett Still, which is in many ways brings together all of the ideas that I'm talking about in terms of understanding the role of language and the role of understanding of African spiritual concepts to reorient our experience around the trauma of anti-Black violence and death in the context of the Americas. And ultimately how an understanding of these ideas, these African spiritual concepts and ideas can further strengthen us and enhance us because they provide for us an outlet to think, to be, to see ourselves reflected in ways that Western languages and Western spiritual practices do not. So, introducing Emmett Still.
Strange fruit, raining down in this garden of Eden. Eating premature, it's the love that we needed. Flesh ripped apart, it's like a struggle just being. A troubled skin just to be in, oh God, the struggle we be in. Drawing breath from certain death, this living ain't easy. Between the world and me, we need coats like Ta-Nehisi. Chill from the winter's wind, it's quite breezy. It's a cold, cold world, and no, we stay freezing. We stay frozen at war like Greeks and Trojans. Temperatures rise, feel the heat like an explosion. Silence in our pain, we cry with no emotion. Eyes swollen with tears, we stay hoping. Back bent from the weight, we stay coping. Try to breathe through the pain, we stay choking. A better day on the way, we stay hoping. Oh yeah, there's trauma and pain, but we ain't broken.
Uncle Sam's like, go get yours so we go police to get ya. Like, oh my God, we're still preaching to the fire. But who would ever know? We got devils in the choir. Like, oh my God, we're still preaching to the fire. But who would ever know? We got devils in the choir. Niggas, like I'm alive, my niggas. Still got survive, my niggas. This ain't no job, my niggas. It's time to pay up the Pecous, niggas. My freedom paper signed by Obama, my mama, Master and Jesus, niggas. Chicken George led me to Georgia, and Kunta brought me to Kansas, and Rosa let down the roses to sing along in my seance. To hide me from my people was to put it in the book, so we book it to Booker T when they threw the book at us. Don't judge a book by its cover, but the story that it gathers. This all of my native tongue, so it's weird content, including my family name. Like America, I'm through with you. It's the true name my mama gave me, Young Georgia.
By the time you are 30, you have been through a certain kind of mill. And the most serious effect of the mill you've been through is, again, not the catalog of disaster. The policemen, the taxi drivers, the waiters, the landlady, the landlord, the banks, the insurance companies, the millions of details, 24 hours of every day, which spell out to you that you are a worthless human being. It is not that. It's by that time you've begun to see it happening in your daughter or your son or your niece or your nephew. You are 30 by now, and nothing you have done has helped you escape the trap.
Emmett still, we still Emmett. Mothers cry over open caskets, they sons in it. My son's in it, your son's in it. The way we move in the world, we constricted. The sense of pride in our hearts, stay undid it. The threat of death on our backs, we run with it. The tragedy and the pain, we won with it. Politicians try to convince us it's all unscripted. A simple whistle, toy, pistol, loose cigarette, and yet I'm still a nigga. Yet, yes, I'm still a nigga. Yep. No arrest, yet the stress is uncivil. Rocking hard, place my home is in the middle, and I'm Emmett still. Yeah, I'm Emmett still. Yeah, I'm Emmett still. Seasons change, sound arranging, yet I'm Emmett still. I will never break, even though they try to break my will. Yeah, I'm Emmett still. Yeah, I'm Emmett still.
If one has got to prove prove one's title to the land, isn't 400 years enough? 400 years, at least 3 wars. The American soil is full of the corpses of my ancestors. Why is my freedom or my citizenship or my right to live there? How is it concealed? Their question now.
Lose your nigga, got a nigga, you was still a nigga. You be walking, hear the word, what you call me nigga for? Your name could be Tamir or your name could be Obama. They don't like you, they don't like your father or your mama. You could be the president, a lawyer, or your honor. And some stupid bitch on Fox TV or disrespect your honor. And I call that stupid bitch a stupid bitch, that's what it is. How the fuck you justify the police killing kids? I represent the people Popo never loved. 100 years ago, we was lynched, we was drugged. 100 years later, still face down in the mud. But I'ma tell you dirty ass devils one fact. You better get hip, we will shoot back. I got this AR with me even if I'm butt naked. And I dare a government agent try and come take it. You see, the only thing the devils feel is a shot it. I let freedom ring in every bullet in his body.
It's a terrible thing for an entire people to surrender to the notion that 1/9 of its population is beneath them. And until that moment, until the moment comes when we, the American people, are able to accept the fact that I have to accept, for example, that my ancestors are both white and black, that on that continent we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other, and that I am not a ward of America. I'm not an object of missionary charity. I am one of the people who built the country. Until this moment, there is scarcely any hope for the American dream, because the people who are denied participation in it, by their very presence, will wreck it. And if that happens, it's a very grave moment for the West.
Oh, you think you could take what's ours? Oh, you think that you claim our power? See the fear in us, disappearing us, cut us down, you just make us tower. Across the waters we walk with gods, get so high we dodge these stars. With these words we haul my cars, writing the rules and even out these odds. With God dancing these odd chances, my wit lit, my prayer spit. Yim and y'all be the liquid, keep my physical fit wet. Urban prayer, herbal flair, urban fear, words of fear. Recognize that they been here, call the names and they be right here.
Well, alright. Live and learn. Get it off BCD when you earn. I know my name and I ain't no slave. Try to hold my pay like I don't know Ray. I dare you. I got questions you ain't got answers for. Miss me with the bunnies and the Santa Claus. Growing up, transpo was a handlebar. Fell off this me with the bandage on. I got pain on me, high rain on me, and I got homies till it's 10 on 3. Then I'm on my own by time in the sky till I own my drone. Pray my not make mine none proud, and her none proud, and her none proud. Black and I'm proud. Yes, I'm allowed. Build my fortune, I can't buy about. House way how.
I'm the omnipotent, omnipresent, I'm the blessing, I'm progression, my profession, this to step in the direction, it's up, next to us, y'all next to nothing, no question, my struggle, question my quest, I rest at the crest, family or death is nothing less, it's more than your mental can process, it's more than a mental process, holding your spirit for hostage, break free is a great key, don't hate me, love me or leave me, it wasn't as easy as I made it look, made the cook, is a reading and even your reasoning, like birds displayed in books, type said like head right step, God in my blood like platelets, God is my blood, let's face it, different ways to the math, many paths to the same sun, salute my ancestors until I became one, on the shoulders of giants that stand in defiance of those that ain't one with the one, I'm like African drums back in the slums, changing the energy, engage with the enemy until my frame is a memory,
chains, new money, no change. Deep fire, low flames, bold claims, bent on my destruction. Kanye told you, I'ma show you, you can't tell me nothing. You can break my body, but can't claim my spirit. I grow exponential, and I know you fear it, and I know you feel it. In the air, you feel it. You can try, but you can't kill it.
I am a god. I just told you who I thought I was. God. I just told you who I think I am. God. I just told you who I think I am. I am a god. I just told you who I thought I was. God. I just told you who I think I am. God. I just told you who I think I am.
I'm divine light in the flesh, I'm a god. Manifest my wife, a goddess, my seeds next to my life. Immortal, no fear of death. Walking water, no fear of death. Alive and well with deep breaths. The God in me is no secret. They raging up in Harlem. Molotovs and B-more. Shutting down Chicago. Won't be no much like before. To be sure, we writing. Teach season, we fighting. Spark the flame, we igniting. Just like Shango when we lighting. Rah!
I am a god. I just told you who I thought I was. God. I just told you who I think I am. God. I just told you who I think I am. I am a god. I just told you who I thought I was. God. I just told you who I think I am. God. I just told you who I think I am. We got this new thing called classism. It's racism's cousin. This is what we do to hold people back. This is what we do. And we got this other thing that's also been working for a long time where you don't have to be racist anymore. It's called self-hate. It works on itself. It's like real estate of racism. Where just like that, when someone comes up and says something like, I am a god, everybody says, who does he think he is? I just told you who I thought I was. A god. I just told you. That's who I think I am. Would have been better if I had a song that said, I am a nigga. Or if I had a song that said, I'm a gangster. Or if I had a song that said, I am a pimp. All those colors and patinas fit better on a person like me, right? But to say you are a god, especially when you got shipped over to the country that you're in and your last name is a slave owner's. How could you say that? How could you have that mentality?
Let me start by thanking Dr. Pecou for that certainly intellectually challenging and stimulating presentation and film. Let me remind our audiences that you still have an opportunity to ask questions by submitting them at our submission portal, which is questions.chq.org, or if you're from any mobile device, desktop, or browser, or if you're using Twitter, pound CHQ 2020. And you can continue to submit those during the question and answer period. They will be collated and sent in to me. So let me start again by saying thank you and welcome. And with some questions that I have received. And of course, one starts with Fahamu, thank you for sharing your art and your thoughts. How have the nationwide protests over the last month and a half affected or worked their way into your art?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and happy to share my thoughts and work with your audience. In response to the question, it's been a really interesting experience to observe the protest, to participate in the protest. One of the things that has, for me, become even more imperative in watching things unfold is, observing the very slipperiness of language that's being used, and the ways in which the demands that are being made, the sort of responses that are happening to those demands. Like, for example, a lot of, well, not a lot, but the protests have been largely around anti-Black violence in this country, disparities in health and economic opportunities, educational opportunities, et cetera. And rather than seeing really robust conversations happening in state capitals and in the national capital, what we've seen largely are symbolic gestures of solidarity. Painting Black Lives Matter down the street, or kneeling in the Capitol building with kente cloth shawls on, right? So it's like, the protests are happening. There's very clear arguments being made about some of the demands that people want to see, real change happening on. But instead, we get, flowery gestures and symbolic gestures in response, right? And so it becomes really, again, I think a really important thing that we examine the language that's being used, not just the language that we're using when we make our demands, but also the language in the responses that we get back. What is being said in response to what we're demanding? What is being said in response to what's being protested about? And I think for me, that has just kind of seeing how these things are playing out has really been getting me to think about the importance of language and the importance of the words we use and the importance of the language and the logic behind some of the things that we're talking about.
Thank you. There's another question that says, Emmett Still is amazing, and I would concur with that. Thank you. The music, the imagery, the wordplay in the name didn't strike me at first. Emmett Still, like even 60 years later, still. This person, the questioner, would love to hear more about how this project came to life and the artists who were involved with it. And I did notice in the credits that you were intimately involved in a lot of the performances.
Yes, that's correct. Just kind of generally, my practice is very multidisciplinary. So I'm primarily known for my paintings and drawings, but I do a little bit of everything, including writing, rapping, art direction, you name it. I kind of have hands in a lot of different pots. But in 2015, I was invited by the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art in Charleston, South Carolina, to do an exhibition at their space. And the invitation came, the actual invitation to do the show, I received a package from Mark Sloan, who's the director of the Halsey. And in that package was a copy of the Post-Courier, which is the local newspaper in Charleston. And on the front page of that newspaper was the story of Walter Scott, who, if you may recall, was shot in the back by a police officer. And I received this, newspaper in the mail, and attached to the newspaper was a little sticky note that just said, "It's time for you." And And this was my invitation from Mark to, create a body of work, to do an exhibition at the Halsey. And that exhibition ended up being the exhibition that I spoke about in the pre-recorded conversation, Do or Die. And as I was working on this exhibition, I really wanted to be very clear and deliberate about the fact that I was not trying to, create something that would be more trauma porn. I wanted to do something that would, reorient our experience with this violence, reorient our experience around notions of death in our community and how we address it, how we deal with it. And I found the language for that in my practice as a initiate into Ifa, and in my understanding of the importance of ancestral veneration and how that grounds us in the physical, and so that language was really helpful for me to work through some of that. And as I created this body of work, and it had multiple parts to it, the paintings, there were drawings, there's performance art, there's actual egungun mask that I created. The film piece kind of came near the end, and it really sort of became the sort of capstone of the entire project. It allowed me to articulate a lot of the ideas that were happening in the individual series that happened as a part of that exhibition, but it allowed me to bring all of those pieces together in one cohesive form, right? So the film allows me to have visual, allows me to have audio, allows me to have narrative, allows me to have performance. All of these things kind of come together. And ultimately, what I wanted to do was use the film as a way to illustrate the impact of having knowledge and awareness and a sense of self as it relates to African indigenous spiritual practices and African spiritual philosophies. And this exhibition, I should mention, was actually my dissertation. So my PhD dissertation is this exhibition, which includes the film, which serves as a chapter within that dissertation.
You mentioned several times now Ifa. Can you expand on your relationship with this spiritual system, and where does it fit in the world of spiritual systems?
Yeah. So Ifa is, and it's also known as Yoruba, but Ifa is one of the oldest known spiritual systems on the planet. It predates, all of the Abrahamic religions. It is a system that's indigenous to Southwest Nigeria, and it has, counterparts all throughout, Central and Western Africa. They have slightly different names, but the system is essentially the same. But Ifa traveled to the Americas via the transatlantic slave trade. And most of us in the Americas are familiar with the system of Ifa through its hybridized versions like Santeria, Candomblé in Brazil, Santeria in Cuba, or Lucumí in Cuba, Vodun in Haiti. So all of these systems are all rooted in Ifa cosmology. What happened as a result of the slave trade is that as Africans were denied the right to practice their spiritual systems, they were clever enough to disguise this practice through Catholicism and other Western religions. And so the Africans who continued to practice would disguise the orishas that they were honoring under the guise of honoring Catholic saints, for example. So for me, my own personal relationship with Ifa began around 2002. And it's, a bit of an interesting story. I was working as a graphic designer, and a friend of mine came to visit me at work one day. He was dressed in all white. I hadn't seen him in, maybe a year or so. And when I saw him and he was dressed in all white, I'm like, hey, man, why are you dressed like that? He was like, I just returned from Nigeria. I was initiated as a Babalawo. And I'm like, a what? And he's like, it's a Babalawo. It's a priest in a practice called Ifa in Nigeria. And he was explaining it to me. And it was really fascinating what he was saying. But as he was talking, a young woman who had just started working for me, her name was Orinike Odeleye. she overheard us talking, and she came around the corner and she was like, "You're a Babalawo? My father is a Babalawo." And I'm looking at the two of them like, what are you guys talking about? What is this thing that you're talking about? But anyway, Ornike invited me to an Ile, which is the temple here in Atlanta. And when I arrived at the Ile on this first day, it was on a Sunday where they have their service where they venerate the ancestors. And as they talked about the symbolism, the practice of venerating the ancestors, the importance, why we do it, and how it's done, all of these things. As they explained everything, I realized that all of the things that they were describing and talking about was things that I was already doing in my artwork that I didn't have a language for. So I was already, in a sense, sort of practicing aspects of Ifa philosophy in my work. Some of my own personal spiritual philosophy was right in line with the practices of Ifa. And so I always say, I didn't find Ifa, Ifa found me. And it gave me, like I said, it gave me a language to understand my presence in the world. It gave me a language to understand the role of my art in the world. And it's helped me in many ways to contextualize, the movement of African descendant people, particularly here in the United States.
Thank you. There's an old adage that says that we are products of our environment. Please tell our audience a little bit about yourself growing up and what inspired you, what impacted the direction of your work growing up.
Sure. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My father was from Panama. My mother was from South Carolina. But unfortunately, when I was 4 years old, my father, who had been suffering with schizophrenia and was undiagnosed at the time, he tried on many of occasions to have himself, committed to seek help, but he would often get turned away by the system. Ultimately, my father had a psychotic break, and he ended up murdering in the presence of me and my siblings. And I was 4 years old at the time. It's my first memory. It's one of the first things that I remember. And, as you might imagine, that dramatically changed the course of my life. I ended up being adopted along with my siblings by relatives in South Carolina, and that's where I grew up, in a small town called Hartsville, South Carolina. And during, my childhood, we grew up Hartsville is a very small town, but we grew up very poor there. But I always loved art. I always knew I wanted to be an artist from the time I could hold a pencil. But I knew I wanted to be an artist without knowing what that meant. And it wasn't until I got to college at the Atlanta College of Art that I really began to understand what it meant to be an artist and what an artist's role was and could be. And that really became evident to me when I began to do work around the telling the story of my mom's tragic death, and also the tragedy of losing both my parents at the same time. And so I created a body of work as my senior exhibition as I was graduating from the Atlanta College of Art that recounted the night that my mom died. And as I presented this work to the public, I saw the way that people reacted to this work. And, I had many people I'd never met before come up to me and share things like, I haven't spoken to my brother in 17 years because we had a fight over something. And now looking at this work, it makes me want to go and patch those things up. Or, I was abused as a child and I never had any therapy about it, but your work makes me want to go and do blah, 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 right? And so it was in that moment that I realized the power and the capacity of art to heal us and to change us and to make us become better. And it was in that moment that I knew what my path was. I remember saying to myself very clearly in that moment, I don't want to make art that's pretty pictures. I want to make art that does something, that means something, that is healing, that can be transformative. And that's why I say that even years later when I found myself in that Ifa temple in that Ile, I felt a connection there that had begun in creating this body of work where I was acknowledging, my mother as an ancestral spirit and finding those connections. And ultimately, Ifa gave me the language to understand all of those things that I experienced in my childhood and how they connected to not only who I am now, but who I be.
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of things going on. A lot of things have impacted your life, a lot of things impacting you today. What are you currently working on?
I'm actually working on a couple of different projects. I recently completed another short film. It's called We Can't Cop Cars Without Seeing Cop Cars. And this is a short film and public art installation in a modified police cruiser. You watch the short film, the entire project centers on Black leisure and joy, and it uses the car as an allegory to talk about agency and mobility. So I just completed that. I just embarked on a project for an exhibition that will open in Dallas in this fall, which is a series called Seven African Powers, which looks at African cultural retentions and contemporary Black culture. And I'm also working on, I'm in the very early phases of developing a project called Pulled Apart, which is really near and dear to my heart at this moment. My father recently passed away from COVID-19 in April. Over the years, as you may imagine, because of his mental health issues and things, our relationship was a very topsy-turvy one. But in the last couple years, we had really begun to develop a rapport with one another, and it was becoming a really beautiful relationship despite his challenges. But after his passing, it really made me think more and more about mental health issues in the Black community, particularly mental health issues that lack of access to proper health care and therapy and post-traumatic stress and all these things that compound our experiences. Thinking about the scores of Black men who have been raised without their father being present. And so I'm doing this body called Pulled Apart that looks at the trauma of mental health and other issues and the impact that they have on fathers and sons.
Thank you. I have a question concerning the focus of your work. Much of it has been on Black masculinity. And the question is whether you've seen any evolution in the general perceptions of Black masculinity over time and reflected in your art.
What I think is really challenging, I was going to say fascinating, but I think it's more challenging, is that there appears to be progress in the representations of Black men in our media. But again, as I made in an earlier those changes are often largely symbolic as opposed to being really substantive. To see a celebration of success in terms of financial or economic success as a measure of manhood. But as we know that there's no real substance in that, because, someone being wealthy, right? If you're an athlete and you have a lot of money, that doesn't necessarily make you a role model. And so we keep trying to attach, the notion of role model or the notion of the phrase I'm looking for, politics of respectability around certain ideas that I think continue to complicate black male representation, because there continues to be a large-scale erasure of black men unless they conform to very specific ideas about what is socially or politically acceptable or respectable, right? And so I think in some ways the progress is actually backwards, because it continues to impose other people's ideas about what a successful black man is on black men, right? And so it's like we're not defining that for ourselves, and I'd like to see more of that.
Okay, thank you. I've just got two more questions, and then we'll wrap up here. The first has to do with the MLK Google Doodle. First, tell us what that is, then how did the opportunity come about, and what was your process in conceiving and crafting that work?
Sure. So the Google Doodle is a program by Google. So if you ever go to Google's homepage, like say for the 4th of July, you'll notice that the Google logo has special art around it that celebrates the 4th of July, right? And so for major holidays or major occurrences, the Google logo will be retrofitted or reimagined by artists from around the world, for whatever that day is. And so for MLK Day in 2020, I was approached by Google and their art director for the Google Doodle program. Her name is Angelica McKinley, and asked to create a doodle for MLK Day 2020. So after going back and forth with Angelica and her team, we, ultimately, presented a series of sketches and concepts to them. And they finally landed on one that they liked. The one that I selected, or the one that they selected, was a sketch that amplified the individual voices or the community voices rather than a portrait of Dr. King. I wanted to do something that affirmed or illustrated the idea that we as individuals, we as American citizens, we as whoever we are, have just as much power and capability to be a great leader as Dr. King was. That we don't have to wait for someone to come with a cape on and save us, but we can be our own heroes.
Thank you. Tell us just a little bit about your work with Big Facts, Small Acts in Atlanta.
Sure, yeah. Big Facts, Small Acts is a wonderful campaign started by a good friend of mine by the name of Sherry Scott. Big Facts, Small Acts is a campaign designed or geared towards educating the Black community, especially around the importance of taking preventative measures in this pandemic, right? And so the Big Facts, Small Acts campaign, encourages the wearing of masks and social distancing. And the campaign initially began by inviting a number of Atlanta-based artists to create yard signs and other collateral that was placed around the city that was again created with messaging to encourage wearing masks, to encourage social distancing. And since then, the campaign has really grown to be more than just a visual arts campaign, but they're also providing masks to those who need them, providing other methodologies for information. There's a website that you can also visit where you can learn more about COVID and its transmission and how you can protect yourselves and protect your loved ones. And so it's been a really great campaign. Recently, some of the artists who are a part of it, who have murals around the city, have gone and retrofitted the figures in their murals by spray painting masks on the figures in their murals, as a way of really saying, like, we need to embrace all of the preventative measures to spread of this disease and to protect our communities.
Well, listen, in closing, let me thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, your philosophies, your vulnerabilities, and your life with us. I think it, again, as I said earlier, art defines us all, and it defines our civilization, and we had a striking definition of that here today. Let me thank all of our viewers for tuning in. As I noted earlier, this is the first of 7 presentations that we will do this year. I urge you to visit our website, aaheritagehouse.org, and you can see on the site a list of the programs that we have. Our upcoming program is going to talk about cultural biases in artificial intelligence algorithms. And so I'm sure you're going to find that stimulating as well. And so again, thank you very much. Have a great evening all. Wear your masks and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.